Jay Crossley, Executive Director of Houston Tomorrow, since 1998, co-hosted with the Houston-Galveston Area Council. Very excited about today. A couple things coming up, just to let you know. We have the Houston Food Policy Work Group is with a group of high school students called the Green Ambassadors.
Yeah, now they're college students. Sort of, they've got a whole feeder pattern of kids, people helping out.
But in the East End, and so that is
March 9th.
March 9th at the East End Management District.
It's going to be the Greater East End Management District, and we may get a tour. They've been all the way from elementary, middle school, high school, and some of the high schools in that area to get kids out planting fruit trees and food forests to deal with like food insecurity in the area, and they've been doing.
And then there's the Houston Green Film Series is once a month over at Rice. This month the date is going to be funny because there's some other things going on. So, but it'll be a film about Hurricane Katrina and really recovery from that by some people from New Orleans. And hopefully, the whole resiliency discussion we're having today. So for all those things, stay tuned to our email newsletter if you're not already on. If you go to HoustonTomorrow.org, you can sign up for our email newsletter, and hope to see you at those things. Today we asked Jeff Taebel to come for his possibly 5th time. He's perhaps our favorite presenter here at the Little Houston Initiative, and to talk about the comprehensive economic development strategy for the region, which is a sort of, I think he will explain it more, but there was a recent sort of, I don't know if you call it a relaunch or update to that, and we wanted him to kind of explain it and explain how this relates to our great region and explain how we all can work together in this economic development strategy. And Jeff is the Director of Community Environmental Planning at FAICP, and one of the leaders of our whole planning community in Houston. And so with that, I give you Jeff.
Thank you, Jay. Welcome, everybody. Now, I was telling Jay before, they've got kind of a trophy they give you, and they do a little routine and everything, but we'll coordinate that better next time.
Yeah.
So this has been an interesting presentation for me because it is a bit of a homecoming. A little known fact about my career is my very first job at HJC a long time ago was to come over here and do county level economic development plans back in the late 80s. And I can't really think of a better introduction to our region than meeting with local chambers of commerce and elected officials about jobs and prosperity. And you know, it was interesting. I had just come over from the Houston Planning Department and kind of had my planner hat on. I was saying, you know, well, really, you know, long-range general planning or comprehensive planning, or we didn't talk about sustainable development back then, seems to me like a pretty good economic strategy. And initially, it's like, I don't know, we're really about industrial site. That sounds kind of far out there. So I'm happy to say that about 28 years later, those things are converging more than ever before, and that's really the story of our comprehensive development strategy, which really starts with the Our Great Region project that Jay alluded to. This plan was wrapped up a couple years ago, but it was the result of a 3-year stakeholder-driven exercise. We had about 15,000 residents in the region participate in various ways. Perhaps some of you were involved in our various advisory committees. And it really was a long-range plan that was based around 6 big ideas. We got a lot of input from a lot of different people in urban, suburban, and rural areas, but the things that made the final cut were those things that resonated in all of them. I'm going to just refresh us all on what those big ideas were. So 6 ideas, 35 strategies. Economic development, we could talk about a lot of different things in that realm, but the thing that resonated everywhere we went was the workforce element. And so we came up, most of these are workforce related, really focusing on how do we become a region of lifelong learning as well as job and financial skills, do a better job of coordinating between employers and education providers, and then work on some more traditional economic development things, business attraction, retention, hard to believe in Houston, and then this whole notion of sustainable local food, local manufacturing, makers economy. Environment. A lot of environmental issues in our region, but the one that resonated everywhere we went was water. Because you know, if there isn't water to drink and water for industries, a lot of the other environmental issues really won't matter because nobody's going to be living here. And again, our strategy, I think, was kind of a mix of more structural solution, but also doing a better job with conservation, green infrastructure, coordination, and resource management. Healthy communities, a lot of interest in that. This primarily is not about Obamacare or single places that let people live a healthier lifestyle at different points of their life. And that includes healthy foods, includes chance to get exercise as part of your daily routines. Access to health services is important. One thing that we heard in a lot of places that kind of surprised us, and Joe Jemmett, I credit him for his leadership on this, is we really have to include mental health as a bigger part of that strategy than we have heretofore. Housing, you know, this has changed a lot in the past couple of years. When we started this project before, I think there was a belief that, you know, housing is cheap and plentiful here. It's not really an issue we need to have any strategies about. While we're still, I think, pretty good as far as median housing cost versus pure metro areas, look at where the housing exists in neighborhoods that are near good jobs, that are near good transit, that are near the kind of amenities that are walkable. That housing isn't so affordable anymore. So we're advocating that we work housing into our local planning and really try to seek more diversity of housing type, make sure we can get a range of housing with access to opportunities, and then really look at our housing stock, not only new housing, but how can we rehabilitate a lot of these structures that may have a lot more useful life, may already be in walkable neighborhoods, but they're not up to code, they're not safe and healthy today. And one thing I really like about a jobs strategy that focuses on safe and healthy housing, people working on rehabbing that house are going to have to be working here at some point. Transportation, this group talks a lot about that, and world class is a buzzword, but really looking at more of a strategic focus on our transportation. We're going to talk more about framework. I should have taken the commuter rail out of there because that's a mode neutral idea. But regionally with transit, when Metro doesn't even cover all of Harris County, so we've got some work going on right now that's kind of addressing that. Unify fare structure and transferability and whatnot. Local planning tools, huge portion of our population lives outside of municipalities. So we talk about land use and transportation coordination, but there isn't any land use side. So what are some other strategies? Things we've talked about more in this group are just, you know, mixed use areas, jobs, housing access, complete streets, and then how can we get more capacity out of our existing right of way? And then finally, perhaps another buzzword of response to natural or man-made disasters, but we'll talk a little bit later about economic resiliency as well. So those are the 6 big ideas and the 35 strategies. We also did a couple things that I've not talked to you about this group in depth, but they were really integrated in all the work we did on the plan. One of the things we used to say as far as the region is that we want the quality of life to be better, as good or better in 2040 than it is today, but that be true for people at all stages of life and in all. With Policy Link and PERE at USC, we did a profile that really looked at some of the structural equity and disequity that exists among different racial groups, age groups in the region. We also did a fair housing equity assessment that kind of broke that down a little bit more. In some measures that the most diverse in the U.S., there are still areas of significant racial and income segregation. A lot of times housing affordability is the driver of that. So I don't know how many of you have seen our relaunched Our Region webpage. So we finished the planning a couple years ago. We've had a couple meetings since then, and I'm sure some may be wondering, what the heck have they been doing with that thing? They just put it on the shelf. I think the future of the Our Great Region plan is going to exist much more in the virtual realm than it is going to in any sort of paper document or meetings. And I'm sure that is a security concern. I'm going to just do a real quick walkthrough of the website. You can you can do specific initiatives. We have a news feed that I see has already had 2 new items added today. So you can see what's going on in terms of things that local governments are doing that are advancing the principles of the plan. And there's quite a few. We would ask that if you're aware of things that we have missed on here, there's a feature you can give us your recommendations for the news feed. We have a series of videos that illustrate the different big ideas. We have a set of case studies. If you're interested in any of the many things that went into the preparation of this plan, we have resolved to support some of the background materials from the meetings we had, as well as the fair housing equity assessment and the equity profile are in here. But I want to, now that I've set all that up, I want to specifically talk about one aspect. We did a survey of implementation within the region. That's the problem with this podium. There's no place to put all this stuff. So where did my graphic go? All right. Risk of live demos. Okay. Because this is my favorite thing in the whole deal. So we had a survey, we had a big ascertainment meeting, and we were trying to figure out what's been done in the past 2 years on all these projects. And very quickly that became an almost unreadable report. My pointer here, an 83-page report. You kind of need to boil it down. So we tried to come up with a representation of each of these initiatives, of the capacity. Is there an entity out here like the Gulf Coast Workforce Board, Greater Houston Partnership, HGAC, or other entity that's working on it? So that is the, I'm sorry, is that the y-axis? It's x-axis. So x-axis is, yeah, are there enough people working on it? Y-axis is, are they working on it? And then we just arbitrarily sought to indicate the size of the effort. So we're hoping that this can be a tool as we and others, such as Houston Tomorrow, think about where might we want to put some emphasis. So this internet connectivity identified as an issue, not much work going on there. This opportunities for lifelong learning, as well as this attraction, fair amount of infrastructure and work going on there. And then if you're interested in seeing sort of what the regional initiatives we identified, local initiatives, challenges. I think that more funding needed is a challenge on every single one of these. And we would say that the 3 has, this is a very high impact strategy. So we've got these for all the strategies. I invite you to peruse those after the meeting. So now, before I was so rudely interrupted, how do I get back to the show here? Okay. Was very interested in when we received the grant because it was a partnership of 3 federal agencies, Department of Transportation. Try to use this process to fold in other planning, so we're spreading more than just the Our Great Region plan. As I mentioned, we have had a 501c3 called the Gulf Coast Economic Development District since 1989, and I was the main staff person in setting it up. The idea really was to create a body here that was separate from HGAC, but staffed by HGAC, which it remains today, that could bring together regional economic development groups to coordinate, share information, set goals, and work together on broad strategies. And we have, ever since then, received some annual funding from the U.S. Economic Development Administration, and HGAC puts some funding into that too. And Josh Owens is here in the front, who's now our key staff to this. So I want to just tell you a little bit about who these folks are, and couldn't get this in 2 columns and still make it readable. So just to give you a little bit of a flavor, we have some elected officials. We have a lot of folks from chambers of commerce, or what are called 4A or 4B sales tax corporations. These are the groups that collect the sales tax to do economic development projects. Academics, union representatives, real estate industry, we've got some private sector folks. So this comprises the board of the 501c3. And when we approached them, we're required to do something called the Comprehensive Economic Development. We said, you know, we're working on this thing called Our Great Region 2040, and economic development coordinate your process with what's going on with Our Great Region. We had some discussions like that with the Regional Transportation Plan and some other groups, but I would say that this group, and these are the wizened, grizzled economic developers who 28 years ago were not as interested in planning, they really embraced it. And we didn't just have the board work on it, we also had a CEDS committee that, sorry that's a little bit hard to read, had some other private sector folks and tried to get even more diversity of opinion and geographic and demographic folks. And by and large, what they came up with, you'll see in a second, was I think very close to what we were aiming for in Our Great Region. So anyway, the CEDS itself is really a strategic planning document. Grant is consistent with a regionally EDA will compare things to. So what we put in here as the goals and strategies is pretty important. You'll see that they're almost, with one exception, 2 exceptions, sorry, verbatim from Our Great Region goals for economic development. So we're seeking to be resilient and adaptive to natural and economic disasters, diverse economy, education we talked about, transportation infrastructure. This one is separate, the data and tools, healthy communities, walkable communities, water and ecosystem, particularly in our 5 rural counties that we don't do the transportation plan in, is understanding the prospects of ecotourism. I think a lot of people, when I started in this, were thinking they were going to get the next Toyota plant, but those ecosystem resources are here every day. We've got 6.5 million people looking for things to do on the weekend. We've got a huge cohort of people nearing retirement who like nice outdoorsy stuff. So that is the strategies of the CEDS. We earlier this year, perhaps some of you participated, and for our board members, of which of these should be our work plan priorities for 26 priorities in the public comments we received. And these were the top priorities from the board members that we received, and you can guess which of those trumps these 2. Much interest in the safe, healthy communities as there was in the goods movement. So we're going to focus on these 2 for our work plan emphasis. I'm going to give you a little bit of a lay of the land where we are on each of those things. Another thing that is, HGAC also, I'm sorry, ahead of myself. So if we're focusing on skills of our great region, and I think you could say that it relates pretty well in these and perhaps other categories. Obviously, if we can improve the skills across demographic groups, I think that's going to go a long way to equity. I think there's some environmental justice considerations. Housing choice, we've talked a lot about. Might be an unpopular supply side statement I'll make. We talked a lot about how can we provide affordable housing. I think this strategy looks more at enabling more buying power of those choosing the housing. And then I think we're pretty well, zip code determines health outcomes. Well, what determines zip code? Housing choice, etc., the environmental side and resiliency. So there's our workforce solutions. HGA job training programs in the region. So if you've seen a sign with this workforce solutions logo programs, but it's everything from summer youth training to daycare for single parents, all the way over to very specific applied skills training. And they periodically, and I think I have enough copies for everybody afterwards, but I don't know if you're coming through it while I'm giving my talk. So I'm just going to hit a few of the high points here. So we have taken our lumps with the collapse of oil prices, but interestingly, we still had pretty good net job creation last year. The top performing economic regions in the country, and we are in terms of absolute job growth over time. How do we stack up in terms of workforce? Well, our workforce board compared us to Sun Belt with the exception of Denver, and they give us a grade in about 15 or 20 different categories, and I'm just pulling out a few that have to do with educational attainment. This is the population age 25 and over that has a high school diploma. So we are Gulf Coast is Houston, we're dead last in that category. You have heard Stephen Kleinberg perhaps talk about this, but we have a high high school dropout rate, and we've also assimilated a lot of people into the region who came here without a high school diploma. Denver, 90%. Not saying that's the same kind of place where we ought to be right up there. That's an issue for us. Moving up the chain again, associate's degree. Denver leading the way, more so than even San Diego. We're a little bit better in this. I think we nose out at least San Antonio, if not Miami. And then bachelors are higher. Actually, we jump ahead in this because, as we all know, we have a large engineering workforce here. Still pretty far behind Denver, San Diego, but we nose back ahead of San Antonio and Miami at least. If you want to see how it looks on the ground, and this gets back to equity, this is mapped by census tract. We couldn't break it into grid cell. The dark green are census tracts that at least half of the people aged 25 and over have a bachelor's or above. And 41 to 50 is the lighter green. So if you want to see where the people are who have the degrees in place to really pursue the knowledge jobs, the high skill, high paid jobs, it's kind of a crescent that goes from Clear Lake, Pearland, Sugarland, up to Kingwood, and then West Inner Loop, Memorial, and then Woodlands and West End of Galveston Island. So that's, talk about opportunity, those are the people that are going to have a lot of opportunities. That's a pretty small part of our region, and I would suggest that map to me does not look like a map of a region that is well poised to compete for the jobs of the century, at least not in a lot of these areas. And let's look how all this affects equity. And the graph looks a little bit weird here because we took out some years to make it more understandable. So we have the men are the lines and the women are the bars. I hope that's That's not offensive. We tried to do, and we don't have 2015 yet. So basically, this is white women, this is black or African American women, this is Asian women, and this is Hispanic women. And then these are African American men, Hispanic men, Asian men, and white men. And you can see how these unemployed in these different time series here. And by the way, this is all data collected by the NOR. So, you know, we see that African American men have this outsized impact, certainly in the recovery, lagging above African American women. And then we look at white men, for example. I'm not going to go through all the permutations on this, but I think you can get the picture. One thing I find interesting is Asian men, that looks like it's about 1.3% unemployed. So they have fared better recently than Anglos. I haven't put that up with educational statistics, but I'm betting there's a correlation there. So let's look at the education direct. 07, just pre-bust. Obviously, it helps to have a bachelor's degree, but there really wasn't a huge distinction between no high school, no high school, no college, some college degree or above. So we're doing pretty well in 2007. Yeah, their prospects are a little bit worse. But when we hit a rough patch, look who gets thrown off the boat. Now, interestingly, to me at least, in 2014, when things are booming again, the high school dropout goes below high school grad, and we could only conjecture on that, but I'm thinking it could have something to do with construction job availability. But that one is going to cycle back and forth. And so when we think about economic sustainability, we have this large, and remember that map of these people live in that little crescent, basically. And the other 13,000 square miles have a lot of people that are getting sort of occupation. This one hits close to home. We'll go with 14 first, and I got to get my cheat sheet out just to make sure I get these right mode. So this is total, thank goodness, business and financial operations and occupations. And these are professional services, so assuming that's doctors and lawyers and fancy consultants. So we notice that there always seems to be, at least in good times especially, pretty good demand for those jobs, which put up with higher education. Service, obviously, a little bit more flux. What we get into is that construction, and that is installation. I guess that's like plumbers and electricians. Sort of the same story, just by occupation. That you know, we talk a lot about training welders. We need more roofers and all that. But those jobs are volatile. To say, because it's kind of anathema to a lot of things I've probably said to this group before, of the creative class. And if you have cool enough places and enough hipsters there, and then plow all the money back into the community, and so we've got to focus on talent, and we've got to focus on. So if we look at who actually employs people in the region, over half of the people in this region are employed by firms with more than 500 employees. And my guess would be that tract work or somehow indirectly associated with larger employees. So yes, we should encourage entrepreneurship. We should encourage, but at least in the near term, we are very dependent upon the hiring are employed by firms and institutions that have been around 11 plus years. Haven't seen as much of a startup growth poll. It'd be interesting to keep tracking this over time and see how that changes. So our workforce board, both looking at economic projections as well as direct surveys with employers, has identified these as the high skill, high growth jobs of the next 20-some years. It's not quite the same time scale as their Great Region Plan. And just thumbing through this, almost all of these jobs are going to at least require either an associate and or some specialized training or apprenticeship program. And just to walk through this, education, interesting. So we've got the baby boom, we all know about them. Millennials, even bigger generation, getting into the family formation age. So we will be creating many schools in the region and hiring many people in all those categories. Energy, I'm not sure that they have specifically updated this list yet, but obviously it's a two-column unit, and you know, some of these things we're sort of hedged upstream and downstream. So there's going to be a lot of jobs associated with design, construction, operation of petrochemical storage. Maybe not as much on the geoscientists and geological technicians right now. Other end of the demographic dumbbell, baby boom generation getting into the high healthcare consuming ages. So lots of medical related jobs here. Obviously we're becoming more digital, and then construction, but particularly specialty construction. There's the welders. But when you go to this website, the thing that our group I think has done a great job is you click on any of these and you can get all sorts of information on the career. Clicking on radiologic technologists, I'm not sure what that is. You can look at the annual demand for that, current average salary relative to all occupations. And then if you go further into the website, you can even see courses that you ought to be thinking about in high school, plus any other specialized training opportunities, and various cool graphics about education requirements so you can help plan a better career path. Now the Gulf Coast Workforce Board, like I said, they offer in the storefront access to all these training services, but each report card, and I found the recommendations this year very interesting, and I think they could have almost been lifted out of our great region, because all but one of them had to do with more basic education. And when you think about that job list, whoops, guess I can't back up, but you remember lots of medical, energy, specialized skills. You're not going to get into that associate's degree program or college for that matter if you don't finish high school. And so how do we keep people in school? It's really working at all lengths of the process, getting that running start with pre-K, having in the early grades more remediation and intervention opportunities, and then beginning at about the middle school, helping kids with their career path, providing that kind of information for students and parents, and then having more opportunities for dual credit or advanced placement courses when you get to high school. So that first floor kind of gets people at least ready to go to a vocational program, if not associate's degree or college. And then we've got to come back and pick up on that large number of people, you know, you saw in the orange and red census tracts, you know, who may have educational or literacy deficits. And then finally, and lastly, we finally talk about the detailed training and apprenticeships, because if that's not all built on top of that good educational foundation, it is probably not a sustainable investment. So I'm going to just radically shift gears now and talk about the other end of the spectrum. So our board was interested in really working on the education part, and a couple years ago, we did a regional goods movement study that really tried to look more specifically than in our general transportation planning, how we could not kill the goose that laid the golden egg, if you will. We have a second biggest port in the country, but we also have a lot of truck traffic. We've got rail traffic jams too, and you know, you can maybe get here quicker depending on where you're coming or going with the Panama Canal. But if you have to sit in the port for days before you get it to where it's going, you know, you might find Charleston or Long Beach more competitive. And one of the things that I found really interesting, that data is not super current, but you know, we think about all this freight as probably being you know, mostly balanced of exports and imports, but it's much more wherever, and we've got to get it to somewhere else in the region or in the U.S. This is combined air, rail, ship, and truck. Only 9% of it is passing through, even though we've got multiple interstates that intersect here. And then a pretty good chunk of it is freight just moving from places within the region. And Taebel, whoops, now I do need to go back. The other thing I found fascinating about this is even though, you know, you think about second biggest port in the country, and we're the place where 17 railroads meet, it's about the truck. And depending on what road you drive on daily, if you drive, you know what I'm talking about, and that is actually going to increase in total share, even with the Panama Canal extension, according to the projections done in this study. And so what are the issues of all that truck traffic? Obviously, I have to spell all those out for you, but there are quite a few that come with that golden goose. And again, getting back to the earlier synergy, a lot of these would be considered environmental justice concerns. So this is just a map that shows some of the major port routes. These reds are industrial concentrations, and then the purple and the light purple are areas that we have identified as environmental justice areas of concern, which is a concentration of low-income minority residents who would be adversely impacted by those issues on the earlier slide. So what can we do about it? I think there's more we can do about this, and I'll get to that in a second, than the other problem. One of the issues with the trucks is we can work with them getting jammed up at the port. We can work with bottlenecks on US 69 or where have you, but a lot of that inbound stuff is at a Costco or a Sam's or an HEB. And so I think it actually, even though I didn't talk about street connectivity and livable centers and all that in this presentation, it almost has a synergy with that too. Can we really look at how we design big boxes and smaller boxes and integrate them with local street system and access management? Because those trucks are not just staying on these roads. But where we can do a lot of good, I think, is where the goods get transferred. So we have identified a number of intermodal facilities in the region, and this study has some specific recommendations for improving bottlenecks and throughput in these areas. And I would add, although I didn't have a slide about it, HGAC also has some programs to help with that. We provide loans for what are called drayage operators that kind of cart the stuff around within the port. We also provide engine replacements for vehicles as well. So we want to kind of be integrated on that. But even though that's not going to help you so much on I-69 or in your neighborhood if a truck is in front of you going into Costco, it can help in these areas because they're finite geographies that we can work with. Now, the other thing that is going on right now, and there's going to be a presentation to our Transportation Policy Council about it on Friday, is our transportation group is going to be updating this work and really conducting a study that focuses on both some of these intermodal improvements identified in the study, but also can we create long-term some that traffic not have to go through, pierce the Beltway or pierce 610. So more on that. We're going to be establishing a regional freight council that's going to advise us in this work, and stay tuned to our website for more info on that. I think our short-term initiatives, though, are really going to be how can we leverage the power of some of this stuff we're already doing at HGAC and maybe elevate it a little bit. So I think right now what our district is focused on is how can we staunch the immediate bleeding from the layoffs in the energy sector, and Josh and our workforce people are going to be meeting with all our local chambers and other stakeholders in the region. First of all, just to make sure people are aware of the tools that are out there, not only for career planning, but existing training programs. And then we'll give you the word on this for our regional freight summit, which we're going to try to have sometime in calendar year. That's not going to be just transportation focused, though. We really want to make that into kind of a holistic discussion where we'll look at mobility, but we'll also look at job impacts and environmental impacts. So stay tuned for more on that. And I'll leave that up. And this is going to be on your website, right? So you can post these links so you don't have to write them all down. But I've got links to all the info. And there's my contact. And when we break, I'll pass out the report card. But I'd be happy to take any questions or hear your response or discussion to any of this.
Thank you, Jeff. Let's break in for a moment. Say we have about half an hour if Jeff is game. That Edward Pringle with the U.S. HUD, our sort of the Houston region field director, is here, and thank you for being here. And I don't know if you want the first question or anything, but thanks for being here.
Well, we thank you for the Our Great Region grant. Any questions? Yes.
Can you speak a little bit about, my name is Maria, we can say I think.
Yes.
I wanted to know more about the resiliency. You mentioned resiliency being very important for our region, but what are the next steps for us? This is a big issue for Houston, and I'm curious to see what will be the next step for us, for this region, regarding resiliency.
Jay, you said there weren't going to be any tough questions. One of the things that is a bit of a challenge in working at HGAC is we can put a lot of effort into things that I get a $3.5 million grant for. Right now, our resiliency work is basically limited to the hazard mitigation grant program, which is more like a small bore project list than kind of the macro sorts of a large existing planning budget for this. But I'll tell you what we've been working on is really trying to get at least some regional dialogue going about the extent to which we should be using sort of structural storm defense systems versus a more passive environmental ecological services based. And the other thing about HGC that's kind of interesting to work on is when you go to meetings with environmentalists in, let's say, central Houston, you'll find a lot of interest in proposals like the Centennial Gate to protect the ship channel, and that the rest of it should really be more of a natural defenses. when you go to meetings in places like Shore Acres or Texas City, you get a very, things like the Ike Dike and structural solutions sound like very good. If we're saying it's almost all going to be natural systems except the ship channel up there on a limb. So we've advocated that maybe I should come up with a regional storm defense system, kind of first line. It's probably going to include some structural and some non, very, very conceptual. I forget what it's called. There is an entity that's been established to pursue that. What's that called, Josh?
Regionals. Oh gosh, I can't remember either. It's regional storm defense.
Right. It doesn't have any funding that I know of, though. So there's some concepts out there, but somebody would have to get an carry. It seems like it could be a long time for that. I think as far as local mitigation activities, though. Yeah, there are some communities that have done a really good job. I think the best thing we could do right now would be just to focus on, can we get houses up a little bit higher, and can we just make the public more aware of their options. I think we've made some strides in evacuation planning. I think we improved communications in Ike over Rita for sure. And then we didn't really focus too much on, focused more on adaptation and climate change mitigation, but I think we need to be looking at that too. So I'd say those are the big issues.
Kind of playing off the comment about communications, where are we in terms of moving forward with our law enforcement and public safety agencies all being able to talk to one another on the radio?
The interoperability issue,
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that, but
the talk has seemed to die down. And
Right.
Nothing's
Yeah.
happening.
we've got a group here that works on that. I could find out, pass that along. Yes, maybe.
Well, I'm Sean Thomas. I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff to Councilmember Cisneros. Actually, Mayor Turner this morning announced that next week he will be announcing the plan for that specific thing of all agencies talking to each other.
Because right now the city up their radios and they can't hear or talk to the other agencies.
So that's something that he's announcing next week.
Okay.
As a plan.
Cool.
Okay. Yes.
This might be a little long-winded, part comment, part question. So it's in reference to the startup community in Houston and this big institution presence,
Right.
of which it wasn't like broken healthcare, construction, those types of things, and particularly oil. And with things like COP21 and the UN Sustainable Development Goals, I'm just wondering, this is where Houston is now in regards to employment, but as the future comes and these things of, trying to reduce emissions to a certain percentage point and perhaps moving away from oil-based energy to renewables, I feel like the startup sector might be where all of the solutions lie. So I'm just interested into, and also you keep talking about funding issues with regional initiatives, and I feel like smaller entities are able to kind of take on and tackle these problems. So I'm curious as to what was reviewed as far as like where Houston is now, but what was taken into account as far as where Houston will be next in all of this research.
Right. I'm going to quote my favorite economist, Yogi Berra, who said it's tough to make predictions, especially about the future. So we have not really sought to predict a changing energy mix. I think that sounds like a great project for maybe a academic think tank to work on. So I don't know that we create the primary, pardon the term, feedstock for that analysis, but I think it would be interesting. We could certainly, I think, do some scenarios on it. And I'm sorry to be flippant about the startups, because I agree with you. I think, anybody here with an energy company? Okay, then I'm going to speak for their perspective. The reason why Houston doesn't have all the venture capital that other regions do is, at least in terms of energy, those companies are the venture capital. So if there's a startup here, they don't have to go to Sand Hill Road in Palo Alto. They can talk to existing purveyors. So I think different companies are kind of at different places in terms of their thinking, but I think Shell certainly is one that's leading in that, at least in their public pronouncements. So yeah, I think that's going to be the key there, is how do we get those innovators in touch with resources from the existing companies. I think there's institutions that can help foster that, and then I think when it takes off, their view is they'll just acquire it, just like Google would acquire your new app or something. So I don't know if that answers your question. I think this gentleman.
Yeah, Raymond Hurst from Manual, and you touched a little bit about the water,
Right.
and what a concern that is for future supply. I'm just wondering what the regional plans are to help address that.
Well, I think the Region H plan, and sorry to go alphabet city on you, we don't do the water supply planning. That's a separate state designated body. I think that they have identified both some reservoirs, but I think the key that I focused in on that was they're assuming, I think, about 30% conservation as part of meeting that need. So I think that's something that we would stress, just as far as working with local governments here, is if you get 30% of your demand met by conservation, that's not any reservoir you need to build or new conveyance you need to build. That's kind of the lower local level, but like San Antonio, I think has reduced their residential demand something like 50% in the past decade. So that would be things like xeriscaping. I think the industrial sector has probably done a better job already of gray water. Josh, what about the purple pipes?
The purple pipes are coming.
Are they?
Yes.
Okay.
We're having actually a meeting here on March 3rd to discuss energy and water efficiency for municipalities.
Okay, and that's on our website.
That's on our website.
Okay, but I know particularly in South Brazoria County, you had a pretty close call there a few years ago. I think was the Dow going to have to shut down for a day? And I forget how many $1 million that being down a day would mean, but I mean it's a bad situation, and obviously we need it to drink and live. But those companies that employ and supply the tax base, they can't have that water go off even for a short time.
Are you aware of any talk about desalination?
I'll defer to Josh on that too.
When the Texas Water Development Board came and spoke to the Gulf Coast Economic Development District last, their point was we have an infinite amount of water. All you have to do is pay for it in terms of desalination. And the rate increase in the delta between desalination versus city water is what's preventing that. However, down in the Corpus Christi area, a lot of new industrial facilities, because of the water insecurity, supply and security, have already invested in desalination plants for industrial uses because they need their supply, whether or not their supply is available. Right.
So clearly it's an economic decision, but do you see that as a likely possibility in the next 50 years, that would be one?
I think it is all dependent on if we have a lot more years like this year. So it's hard to predict, but it's definitely a huge concern for the region, because if we don't have sufficient affordable water to grow economically, it's going to impinge on some economic decisions of industrial plants relocating here.
This man was next, and then
Yes, I'd like to say something about where we are and where we need to go. I'm Lou Martin, 92-year-old lady custodian. I'm an objective, independent, at-large patriot, empirical and visionary, road scholar, and that's R-O-A-D, not R-H-O-D-E-S, and dauntless spirit that cares about three things: our planet, civilization, and posterity. And they're all three dangling on the slippery slope to oblivion if we don't do something about them. there's one thing we can do to save all of them, and what we have is our planet. We have latitudes and longitudes of ocean filled with garbage. There's a ring of it around the entire planet, and our water and air is polluted. Our infrastructure is falling apart. We're over $2 trillion in deficit spending just to keep it repaired, not to expand it and improve it and add to it. And then the other thing is our equipment. And the most important piece of equipment we have is our body. It has to have clean air. You can only live 3 minutes without breathing clean air. Water, food, shelter, and clothing. These are the basic things we had to have today to survive. There's one thing that will save all of these, and that's maintenance. Everything we use has to be maintained. And we have been poor stewards of our planet, of our infrastructure, and our bodies. And if we don't stop and start taking care of them, we're going to lose them, folks. Simple as that. You know, every time you gain something, you gotta give up something for it, and it costs money to take care of these things, and money's only good for one thing. It gives you choices to do things with. That's it.
Well said. Dr. Sen.
Yes, since you talked about energy as one of the important components and you brought up emission, I'm just wondering if HGAC has explored the possibility of inviting all the CEOs and others involved in the energy companies in the Houston area, this whole Gulf Coast area, to look at how and if, maybe they are already, and I'm just assuming, there's no indication that they have invested into alternative energy, including solar, and it seems to me this is an ideal place for them to get into it and perhaps promote it through products that they're able to sell besides oil and gas and digging up and fracking and contaminating the water. So I'm just curious as to whether that aspect has been explored by anyone at AGSC or whether they're doing it. Maybe I'm assuming.
The prospect of convening a meeting of the CEOs.
Right, and looking at whether they have thought about investing into alternative energy. Maybe some oil companies are doing it, I don't know. But
yeah, I think they're looking into it. I'm not aware of anybody convening. I think there are other sorts of convenings. I don't know exhaustively, other than a few, but I know Shell for sure.
As a leader in that area, it would be good to have some of the people involved in planning for future investment.
I'm going to suggest, Josh, that we ought to get a small round table of the highest people we can get and discuss that issue at a future Economic Development District meeting. What do you think?
I think that sounds wonderful.
Okay. Yes.
I also am curious about agriculture in the region. I noticed that of the 5, I guess they're districts, counties, many of them were in orange when it came to college degrees, and I'm wondering if those areas are where big ag is located, and that might be why there's a lower population of people there. And also I've heard that we're losing farmland in Montgomery County due to, the investment in the woodlands there. So I'm just wondering what's happening with food security and agriculture in the region as well, and if that's something HGAC deals with.
You know, we haven't done too much on the ag side. Let Jay talk about the food policy group, but
I'm a part of it. I was just curious if y'all were doing anything.
No, you know, again, not trying to. So when everybody says they're not making an excuse, it's an excuse. I'm not really sure the value we add to that sort of discussion. You know, our board is primarily comprised of municipal and county officials, and we could maybe put more information out there, but Montgomery, I mean, the counties can't regulate land use. The best thing you can do, I think, would be to prop up the farmers somehow so that their practice would be good. But I'm not sure what sort of unique selling proposition, other than maybe doing some more on the data side, we would And that's, when we've talked about this with Jay in the past, that's where we always wind up getting hung up. I mean, we could talk about permits for farmers markets and municipalities and things, but I'm not sure what else. Open to suggestions on that, though.
Well, I'll throw in that there is an element of the CEDS, which is the local
Right.
sourcing marketing, and that is a very reasonable concept for GCEDD to focus on and basically have a Go Texan type concept,
Right.
but a Go Houston.
Right.
So I support that being a focus. However, it's a much bigger problem, and farmland loss is primarily due to transportation spending policy in our region. And Harris County loses, is it 3,000 to 5,000 acres of farmland every year. And that has to do with transportation policy, and well, really land use, but which is based on transportation policy. And so we have advocated long that at the very least our transportation decisions should recognize the farmland loss. There is a federal Farmland Policy Protection Act. During the Clinton administration, there was a deal to basically gut that act of all teeth. So it is sort of optional for states to play along with that act. TxDOT sometimes fills out the form in the FEISs, but when they do, they note, 290 expansion would take, I think, 10,000 acres of farmland. The induced development caused by that freeway project will take.
And no one knows.
And that's never a part of our transportation discussion.
Yeah.
So you could have that discussion if you wanted, and the data's there, but it's not discussed. So,
You had the next question too.
so then before my long-winded question, there were two other responses to things that hopefully can be quick on water things, and I think environmentalists did a good job of getting at some amount of that money is for conservation, like you're saying. And that might be an interesting role for HGAC, is how do we optimize the region's approach to conservation and tapping that money and getting that money to come here to do conservation would be an interesting thing to talk about. And then about the resiliency, I'm not, Houston tomorrow is about the 13 counties and all our people, but to, for a moment, take the point of view of the elitists who want to focus on ecosystem services and things that will protect the most people across our region, I would accept a broader discussion if the broader discussion can involve a more robust system look, and that people living in hurricane-prone areas and various policies that cause more people to live in hurricane-prone areas has to be part of the discussion. So if you build the Southern Grand Parkway, 500,000 more people will live in hurricane-prone areas and will cause a massive evacuation problem. And so that if that can be part of the discussion, the feedback loops, how do we protect our people who live in such areas, but it has to be part of the discussion about how many more people are going to live in such areas and need protection. So then my question is freight. And I think there's a structural issue about, and this is discussed a lot, that freight rail, which is the most efficient mode and much better for general people of Houston and for the environment than freight truck, that it's difficult to put together deals to fund projects because of the building Grand Parkway, which is really subsidizing truck freight with the way that our current funding structures work. But it's a lot harder to fix problems on the east end of communities that are really impacted by freight. And so could HGAC really look at the structural issue and try to find solutions? And the example is Los Angeles did their big project where they built a giant trench, and that solved lots of issues for neighborhoods and solved lots of issues for freight. And then it's a public-private partnership where the freight trains it's essentially a toll road for trains. And so that whole, how do we have in 10 years from now when we're doing a tip, freight rail at least being at the table, at least being an option for our region to invest in versus freight truck, and make it sort of a more level playing field for public investment.
Well, I think that
I have an answer to some of that. I'm a real estate broker and I do creative concepts, and in the 60s I was showing South Padre Island to some supposedly investors, and I had some architects then design some houses shaped like igloos that would withstand the wind and the water would float around them. Our lighthouses stand there for years and years and years, and all that wind and tornadoes and everything, and they're still standing. It's the roundness of the structure that keeps them standing, because if something is flat, that wind's gonna hit them and knock them right over. Just like they cleaned up Bolivar here when we had Ike, man, they cleaned it like the babies come behind.
Well, back to
And then
that.
also RV parks, but RVs, so you can crank up and boogie out of there when they come in. This is where you got, Mother Nature is not going to conform to us. We have to conform to her.
Yes, and I actually, glad you mentioned the LA facility, and Chicago has done something like that. I'm hoping that our new freight group and our new update can put some of that on the table too. The only caution I would give is the point I raised earlier. Yes, as far as stuff going in and out of the port, I think we could, Lily, correct me if I'm wrong, get more of that on, probably could get some more of that on trains instead of trucks, or at least get it farther away from here before it goes on a truck.
It's a capacity issue.
The other issue with the trucks, though, is the cost quote problem. A lot of those trucks are making some stops in this region, and you can't really have a freight train come from, you know, the Walmart thing, 100 cars, and it's going to stop and drop some stuff off at this Costco. So that problem is so all the things you talked about, private package and lack of coordination and whatnot, just gets exacerbated even further if you're going to try to do sort of fine-tuned coordination with ginormous trains going through the city. I don't know where this is. Maybe somebody here knows the status. I think, wasn't Harris County looking at a big at-grade crossing remediation study? I may have misremembered that. I think there's been some looking at it. I don't know that there's been movement to, you know, invest a lot of federal funds in it, but I think that is getting on people's radar screen, especially the East End is, you know, that is a place of a lot of new economic activity. Right there, wrong, the problem's been there a long time, but I think people are.
I've seen that map several times in several different reiterations, but in all honesty, in terms of the structural problems, is it too late for the city of Houston to do anything about it because we don't have zoning, and most of those problems are because you have someone living in a house next to an industrial plant? How can we as a city try to do something to where we're not telling people you have to move or you need to move, but we are creating a buffer between them even though they're neighbors?
Well, I think a lot of you know Jim Blackburn. I was talking to him about just that issue, and this may sound like kind of small beans solution, but he said that you know you're right. The zoning, the horses out of the barn. Those facilities can cost $5 billion a piece, so they're not going away. We'd like for people to be able to stay in communities, but the key is, as Jim said, is that we've gotten pretty good at waging war, but we need to learn how to wage peace. And if you're living in a fence line community looking up at this giant tank with security guards, there's no way in other than to go to the TCEQ for any relief. That's a very daunting prospect. So I think it really begins just by you know, working with more community people being let in and dialoguing about it. Maybe there's some things we can do about dust and noise and light. You know, hazard of an accident at the plant, that's just there. But I didn't bring this map. Anybody who thinks you know, people not in those EJ communities are not region on trucks and look at that pipeline map. It's not as in your face as in a fence line community, but we sort of live with that region wide. So I think there's some things we can do to minimize impacts. But you're right, that footprint is is where it is. If you look where the new plants are going, though, I think that they are perhaps a little bit better sited outside of those EJ.
I do want to make one comment. I used to work with a lot of plants 15 or 20 years ago, and they were becoming very, very sensitive to their fence line kinds of issues. You know, started with, you have a little accident, and the school shuts down, everybody kind of starts paying attention to it. But a number of them out on the east side of Houston along the channel started buying up those houses on their fence line, and a little farther to create a buffer around those facilities.
And that's actually one of the many problems that we're having at the city is that you now have residents where the plant has gotten to a part of the neighborhood that's very historic to the neighborhood. So we're trying to figure out, how do you seriously create that basically friendly neighbor, you know, what's happening across the street from you type?
I know the plant managers that I was working with were using the nonprofit I worked with as a way to reach out into their communities to create those kinds of things. But it kind of circled back to the farms. My 4th grade Texas geography, Texas was Harris County had the highest truck farm and cattle production of any county in the whole state of Texas. And yet we've got hardly any farms or cattle operations now because we put houses. It's not just roads, it's houses and malls and everything else. You know, we all want to be able to go to the mall and go to Starbucks instead of having a farmer in our front yard. So, yeah.
And I even was thinking about running for the Harris County Hides Commissioner before the position was abolished.
Well,
Can I make a comment?
yeah.
Okay. A little while ago, I was introduced as Director HUD here. How many of you know about HUD? Everybody? I guess that was a big person, but many people think of HUD as just housing. The UD is urban development, and that sometimes gets overlooked. As director, we have approximately $30 billion in this 35 county area that we oversee. And I bring that up because there's a lot of things that we're talking about. We have people on my team that, Ms. Walls normally comes here, you know her real well. She's our public housing director. And we talk about, we interject things that we might know. And of course, now my background, to give you a little bit, I'm just gonna take a second. But I've worked, here recently, I was the chairman of the board for the Federal Executive Board. Many of you know about that, the FEBs. We have approximately 114 federal agencies in the service. And currently I'm the vice chair. So we get involved in a lot of things as to what's happening in the communities that we serve. And I think that's important. I'm also working with the White House initiative. I'm the chairman, or I'm the regional director for Region 6 for all of the region, working with the Asian American and Pacific Islanders. And that's part of my duty. So we look at infrastructure, we look at what's happening and building up all of our communities, and that's part of my job. But I wanted to bring that out, but it's important in what you're doing, and I'll bring that back to my staff. This is important, because communities we live in are not just houses and infrastructure, they're people, jobs, themselves, and raise generation. And I'm from a little place called Tyler, Texas. You know where that is? If not, it's a small place, but it's growing. And when I came from Vietnam back in 1960 at Ellington Field, and I spent 28 years in the Air Force, and I've been with HUD now almost 20 years. So I've seen a lot of happening. I've seen the area here in Houston grow and grow. And you're right, there are a lot of animals, a lot of farms. Not that way now. But that, I don't think they're going to bring the cows back in the area.
They're not planning that subdivision.
They're not doing that. Use all the resources that we have available. And I just want to kind of make that, make you aware of that. Thank you.
Very much. Well, with that, thank you very much. And we will see you all next month.
So Jeff, you
Thank you. I have a comment here.
I would like a copy.
Very impressive.
Good idea. We'll see who we can get. I was looking at the CEOs, but,
I'm thinking that this might, since Dr. Williams is one environmental.
yeah.